And the worsening crisis has now forced the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Ranil Wickremesinghe, to step down from the post. He says he will pave way for the all-party government. Earlier, remember, unprecedented scenes were witnessed from the presidential palace, where the protesters stormed inside the presidential palace and then the Prime Minister's residence. And now news coming in of the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka stepping down. We have Priyank joining us on the broadcast with more details. Priyank, you in fact earlier also reported on how the protesters had hit the streets and the crisis was worsening, but it has reached a point where the president's whereabouts are not known and the Prime Minister has stepped down.
Yes, Sati, Swati, because what is happening in Sri Lanka is certainly unprecedented, because the country does not have the Prime Minister now, neither President is also present there. But throughout the day, there have been series of protests which has been happening in Sri Lanka. But the protesters turned Sati, very aggressive. The moment for the first time, the monks, joined the protests, and later to that, there were series of individuals who came from across the country to the city of Colombo, and later to that, when all these individuals in lakhs of number came, the intel input was also given now to the president of Sri Lanka, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, against whom these protesters were protesting. He had to flee away because of the gathering which was there, and without any kind of stopping and any kind of forceful means which was used by the army or the police, the protesters barged inside the residence of the president of the country. Later to that, Ranil Wickremesinghe called for a meeting where the speaker also asked him to offer his resignation, and that is what has happened. Ranil Wickremesinghe, who was made the Prime Minister of the country after the Gotabaya Rajapaksa's brother stepped down from the Prime Minister's post, Ranil Wickremesinghe has also resigned. So there have been very dramatic scene of incident which has happened throughout the day in Sri Lanka. But the biggest challenge for the country would be that how the economy will be revived, because at this stage, when the president is not there, the Prime Minister is not there, obviously the education is not going to
understand the political situation and what is a way out of that, Priyank, we have Mr. Iran Vikramaratne, Sri Lankan Member of Parliament, joining us on the broadcast. Thank you very much for giving us your time. We understand that there's a crisis in your country which is only worsening. Unprecedented scenes were witnessed today when the protesters stormed inside the presidential palace, then the Prime Minister's residence. Now the Prime Minister has stepped down. What is the way out of this economic and political crisis in Sri Lanka?
The political crisis, we need to constitutionally make a transition. Party leaders meeting was held about an hour ago, and the consensus or the majority view among party leaders was that both the Prime Minister and the President should both resign. So the moment that happens, then the Speaker of the House becomes the acting President. And then the Speaker of the House could invite somebody to be Prime Minister and form a new government. And that government obviously has to be an all-party government, and that government is temporary, because ultimately you need to go for a people's mandate. The protesters want change. They want the dictatorial presidential system to end, and they want clean government, corruption-free government, and so forth. So that will be the way forward. So first, resignations today, hopefully, and then maybe the Speaker will swear in a Prime Minister and an all-party government. That will be the next step.
Right, so an all-party government, that's what in fact now former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, who says he has stepped down, has also said that he will pave way for an all-party government. Who are the candidates for the top post? Any information doing the rounds on that? If you could share with us the inside information on what is transpiring.
Yeah, there has been no discussion on who the individuals should be, once the new president is in place, the acting president, he'll have to call on somebody who has the majority confidence of the House, and then that person will have to basically get involved in forming the cabinet. But I think there'll be some consensus building before that. And I think that consensus building is happening while I am talking to you behind the scenes. because the consensus is needed, because this is just an interim arrangement, an interim government to deal with the immediate crisis and then pave the way for an election.
Right. Mr. Wickremesinghe, stay on with us. We have Padma Rao, senior journalist on the broadcast as well. Ma'am, I'll come to you. I first want to ask a couple of important questions to Mr. Wickremesinghe. In terms of, you said people want a change and ultimately there will have to be elections. But for that, you would need a stable environment in Sri Lanka. You would need some sort of a stability. Till then, what is going to be the priority of this all-party government?
Is this question for me or
no, it is for Mr. Wickremesinghe, ma'am. I'll come to you right after that question.
All right.
Yeah.
The all-party government, the first thing would be is to, its legitimacy, create acceptance that within the country that people actually trust it, and also the international community. So the political side could be handled if people see an election coming down the road, because then they know that a mandate is being sought. But the immediate issue is economic issue. So the economic issue is that Sri Lanka has not been able to service its debt, and that has to be addressed. And discussion has been going on with the International Monetary Fund. So a staff level agreement needs to be signed pretty quickly. And then immediately after that, we will have to get into a number of urgent reforms that are needed. And that is why building an all-party consensus will be important in taking those quick decisions. We will also need the help of all our friends and the friendly countries around, particularly because people are on the streets because they don't have things like oil, you see. And I think to reduce the tension, we will need to do that. The real challenge is going to come on debt restructuring, which we have already, the government has hired its advisors, both legal and financial, and we have to get the Indians and the Chinese to agree with the OECD and bring everybody onto one platform on the debt restructuring.
Bring everybody on board. Most importantly, the people of Sri Lanka who have hit the streets now, are out on the streets. In fact, I want to bring in Padma Rao. Now, Padma Rao, many people, many experts, they're saying that this should have happened earlier. It should not have come to this point. What is your assessment of the developments that are taking place? Is it the fury of the people, the anger that is being witnessed on the streets that has forced the president and the prime minister?
Yes, most certainly. I mean, it's the anger and it's the absolutely outrageous shortages that people have been facing for several months. Sri Lanka has suffered. I mean, I've seen it suffer for 30 years, the total period since I've reported on Sri Lanka, and I've covered it as a war correspondent during the civil war. But I must say that I've never ever seen suffering of this kind, especially in southern Sri Lanka, which has always relatively been, relatively well off. So yes, certainly it's anger stemming from shortages which are chronic. I mean, you're not able to send your kids to school. You're not able to, you're an auto rickshaw driver, you're not able to earn enough money because there's no fuel. You're spending all your days standing in long lines. We were out there, as you know, reporting for you last month. And, as I said, I've done it for the past 30 years. And I have not witnessed scenes like this. So certainly it was anger, which today, spilled. Up to now, it's been very peaceful. All the protests have been very peaceful. But now there's a new element, and I'm afraid if this new element of, greater aggression is not brought into control again by the crowds themselves, then we're likely to see a greater military presence, irrespective of who comes into power as an interim government now, because there will be simply no other way to control, such angry crowds. Just to your question on Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe's resignation and who will come, I mean, right now all we know from the odd tweets and the reports we're getting out of Sri Lanka is that the speaker will take over or is likely to take over. According to the constitution, he can take over as the interim president. But then again, there is not much, there is a bit of discord already on various political Twitter handles about how long the speaker should remain the president and how soon elections can be held. And again, if you're talking of fresh elections, you're talking of fresh expenditure. It's not cheap to hold elections. This is a country of 22 million people, So and can Sri Lanka afford this expenditure right now? No, it can ill afford such expenditure. So everything is interlinked, and it remains to be seen now. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Wickremesinghe's resignation will be accepted, of course, because, as I said, he's not an elected Prime Minister strictly. He has only one seat in Parliament. He was named to the position by the President, and he has, not everyone sees eye to eye on that selection. So I think his resignation will be accepted. But will the opposition, and will all these politicians who have met today be able to put up a credible face in front of the IMF and in front of all these donors with whom talks are ongoing? Or will they be further delayed? That is the big question. Because so far, and I think Iran will also, second this, there have been the opposition leaders, various opposition leaders have been offered positions in an administration, whether interim or not, but they have refused as long as Gotabaya was there. And now that both Ranil and Gotabaya are no longer there, will they now take on the mantle of that responsibility? Because it is a huge responsibility. Whoever comes into power now is bound to be blamed, because the shortages are not going to end overnight. They're going to last at least till the end of 2023, as Mr. Wickremesinghe himself put it rather optimistically.
Right. I think you've raised a lot of important questions, and the answer lies in the leadership that takes charge now and the solutions that they come up with in terms of bringing stability. Let's hope that there's an end to this misery that people of Sri Lanka are suffering from. Thank you very much, Padma Rao, and thank you very much to Mr. Vikram Ratne for joining us on the broadcast with your views. Thank you for your time.